we're talking about today is embracing the cloud. The cloud is one of the latest and greatest words, but it's actually gotten quite a bit of traction. It's reaching the bottom of the slough of despond within the hype cycle that we see for new technology every year. So the cloud is being used by everyone. As an aside, we at Athens Group about 5 years ago had a large server room, 32 plus servers. Today, we've got one. We use everything in the cloud. We have 24/7 availability. So even as a small company, with worldwide reach, we use the cloud for everything, whether it's part of the Microsoft Cloud, Amazon, Salesforce, OpenAir. We have all of our systems off of our physical sites, and we're using the cloud. So we understand very well the risks that the cloud has provided. What I want to talk a little bit about today in this webinar is take a current look at all the malware that's running loose in the retail sector, and kind of lay out the risks you face and how you can protect against them. All of us buy something at some point in time. Probably most of us have accounts on Amazon. We've got accounts with our security brokers. We've got accounts at our banks. Most banks are charging a lot of money now for paper checks, so we are doing everything online. Look at every time we swipe our card at a Home Depot or a Starbucks, we're going to be vulnerable to having our identities taken and having any of these issues pop up. In 2013 and 2014, malware attacks against retail companies more than $90 billion. And these were just the ones reported. We all shop at Target, Home Depot, 7-Eleven, or even Adobe online, and we're going to be paying for this. World's biggest data breaches, and here's an example of some of those. And you can see when you start looking at data breaches where there were losses greater than 30,000 records. Some of the main ones, eBay, 145,000 records were lost. JP Morgan, 76,000. UPS, we don't know how many were lost there. AOL, 2.4 million. And then things like European Central Bank, Domino's Pizzas, and this was Domino's of France. So if any of you had bought a Domino's pizza and had it delivered in Paris, you probably had your identity snagged. Even Neiman Marcus and things like Snapchat, some of the universities. This is a real issue that's gotten exponentially worse in the last 2 years. I spent most of the 1980s at Los Alamos National Labs. And while I was there, we were going through the process of basically moving off of mainframes onto distributed computing. And being on distributed computing, we were all on ARPANET. And as part of ARPANET, there were lots of malicious activities. There's a gentleman by the name of Cliff Stoll who wrote a book in the 1980s called The Cuckoo's Egg, and he talks about how we were fighting against malware and hackers all the way back in the 1980s. Some of those exact same things are now present today, but they're much more prevalent. In the 1980s, large research organizations, universities, corporations had networks. Today, you've got a network in your home. And when you start looking at the network you have in your home with your smartphone, with your smart refrigerator, you've got an enormous number of openings where you can have your identity breached very quickly. We look at the evolution of cyber attacks. Really, the start was back in 1971, the very, very first virus, what we refer to as the creeper virus, which creeped out across the across the net once we got a net in place. In 1971, we had ARPANET. As an aside, and I'll show my age, I had my first email address in 1974. 1974, I was at Boeing working on some fairly large aerospace projects and military projects, and we were linked into ARPANET. In 74, we published the first directory of email addresses. It was about 25 pages. That was it. And that was everybody in the Department of Defense and some of the other research areas. First Trojan came out in 83. First internet worm was Morris in 88. You can see the evolution of getting more and more sophisticated up until 2007 with a piece called Zeus that was released. Zeus was the door opener for point-of-sale systems. Zeus was the first cyber attack vector that would actually go down and be able to infect a point-of-sale system. So that point-of-sale system would have a small piece, a small Trojan horse running on it that would be basically calling back to a main server somewhere with every piece of data you swiped on your credit card. 2008, raw POS came out, and that was the first POS RAM scraper, and by RAM, random access memory. But the idea of a point-of-sale scraper is not just some software. If you think of some of the older ATM machines that we used, and the first ATM machine I used was at Seattle National Bank in the 1970s. They were fairly big, bulky things. The original scrapers were a piece of hardware that would actually fit over the existing ATM or the existing swiper. So when you swiped your card, it would read your card, and it really wouldn't even go into the ATM. What would come up was it would notice that a card activity was there and ask for your PIN number. Well, then usually what they did on these kiosks was mount a motion-sensitive camera at the top, which had a small transmitter in it and would transmit your PIN number as it looked over your shoulder. So that was the first scraper. There were lots of hardware, fairly bulky. 2008 became the first RAM scraper, so it could go right into random access memory. Also, the beauty of it, if you want to call it that, was that when it scraped RAM and the way the systems were written, it was not encrypted when it was in RAM. So it read the raw data. Once it got out of RAM, it was usually encrypted, and people thought that was safe because no one was going to get in and look at their memory. The RAM scraper took that and eliminated the need to break encryption. So as we moved through, again, 2010 was the Stuxnet. 2011, the first point-of-sale Trojan paired to a RAM scraper was in place. So now I've got this Trojan that will sit in memory or some other place. Usually it's sat in part of your, on a Windows machine, it would be the BIOS, the basic I/O system. It would sit there in the firmware, and then it would collect enough data and then finally send that data out using your email to a website somewhere where it would be collected. By 2012, when we got into the black point-of-sale system and into Dexter, that's when point-of-sale started getting very sophisticated. Dexter was part of the day zero attack software that was in Stuxnet. So people learned a lot from Stuxnet.